Well, folks, thanks for joining us again today, and forgive me for getting a little late to posting today's news. Been a crazy few days here of traveling and keeping up with different speaking engagements that I've got to do. Getting this to you a little late, but want you to have it late on Friday and before the weekend. And thanks for those of you who are joining us, who are new to the show, haven't been here before. You're joining increasing numbers at Stockwell Day-to-Day News. I want to say, every day there's lots of news, but today, just unbelievable stuff. And I'm so glad you've tuned in. Take a look, comment, and let's jump right into it. First of all, on a very tragic note, you're aware that in Manchester in the UK, a horrific killing that took place on Yom Kippur, just after Yom Kippur, the most important day probably in the Jewish calendar. And as Jewish worshippers were coming out of their synagogue, they were rammed by deliberate ramming by a vehicle, and then the person jumped out and started stabbing people. This is very intentional, obviously. People died. There's at least 2 dead. There may be more. And just unimaginable as the danger to Jewish people around the world at their synagogues and elsewhere continues to increase. And I suppose it wouldn't be, it's concerning, but we might feel a little bit of solace if we knew that governments were taking this seriously. In terms of attacks on Jews. And we saw the Prime Minister of the UK coming out with some statements saying, our hearts go out to the community, et cetera, and we're going to make sure that Jewish communities and synagogues are protected. Well, my question is, how can you say that? How can he say that as a prime minister when you look at certain situations, let's say around this specific case? The guy who did the killing is a radical Islamist Muslim. Now, take note before you come shrieking at me with slurs of Islamophobia. I am not afraid of Islam. I am very afraid of radical Islam and radical Islamists. There's a difference there. This particular guy, his actual name, his first name, his real name on paper is JIHAD. So what a surprise that, he would have wound up doing these horrific things. But not only that, he was out pending a trial that of his on rape of a young girl. He was out on bail. He also had been found guilty of, not that long ago, a few years ago, deliberately accusing and sending messages, but being very open and blatant about sending messages to a UK member of parliament who was very pro-Israel, and that he was going to kill him. So I guess I would ask, among other things, first for his immigration status, and if he's come from another country into the UK, and this is the type of question we need to ask ourselves in Canada and the US, if you're bringing in people who hate your country, who hate your values, who state it very openly, who break your laws in the most horrific of ways. He was already facing trial on rape and attempting to, or at least alleging he was going to murder somebody. How is this guy still in that country? And at the same time, where you have the Prime Minister of the UK apparently making these statements, trying to show some kind of empathy for Jews and for Israel, when just 3 days earlier in Parliament, he had stood up and signed on to a statement saying that Israel is guilty of genocide. So you can say one thing, but when the laws and the statements of a country are all geared and can be taken in a way that a psychopath radical Islamist would see it as, at least, if not, and I'm not saying encouraging it, but almost as what they call a structure of permission to do these horrendous things like kill Jews, I would say, what do you expect? And it's time citizens started making elected people pay a toll at the ballot box who are saying one thing, but all of their policies are leading to other horrific events. Time we really took a look at that as voters in Canada, in the UK, in the U.S. Talking about extreme cases, you remember about 3 years ago, now this is a U.S. case, but what's happening in the courts there can also be and is a reflection of what happens and what is happening in Canadian courts. Here we have the situation in the U.S. where this person 3 years ago was arrested and charged outside the home of one of the Supreme Court justices, Justice Kavanaugh, and once they had unraveled all of the information, he had traveled all the way across the U.S. This guy, obviously, he was armed with a firearm. He had planned to kill Justice Kavanaugh, meticulously planned it out, even giving more than just hints on his internet postings, and all of this. He was, of course, found guilty. It was a clear-cut case of having the intention to murder and even being equipped to do so. And today in court in the U.S., the judge, where the prosecution was asking, I think they thought simply, for the mandatory sentence of 30 years. And it could be higher, but a mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years. It's very serious when you have somebody who has talked about, planned about very methodically to assassinate a Supreme Court justice. That doesn't get much more serious. And today he was sentenced to 8 years. He's already been in jail for 3, so maybe at the most, it wasn't even 8 years, it was 96 months or less than 96 months. And the situation here that we're looking at is the judge's comments were, well, I'll just leave it at fascinating. First of all, the person, as it came out, is all very clear and accepted as true, identified as transgender. This is an increasingly alarming and disturbing trend we've seen over the last several years, and I'm not for a minute saying that all transgender people are going to wind up being murderers. But the most of the last series of horrific public murders and killings have been done by people who identify as transgender. That's just a fact. You can get angry, you can get mad, it's just a fact. At the very least, shouldn't we be looking at the drug therapy that almost all transgender people are on? I mean, they say they're at peace with their decision, but they have to take massive therapeutic drug therapy. So shouldn't there be a look at some of the pharmaceuticals? Is that upsetting them? Is that what is making them psychopathic? We don't know. But let's go further. The judge's comments in the reading, in her reading of the sentence, for instance, told the parents that, yes, it would be a good thing if you would accept the fact that your child, now an adult, was transgendering and wanted to transgender. The judge went on to say that part of the reason she was giving the lighter sentence was because of the transgender and identity issue. Now, if that becomes a precedent, folks, we've really got to give that some serious thought, that judges could actually, if this becomes a precedent, give a lighter sentence to somebody who claims to be transgender. The judge also lamented the fact that this person would not be allowed, this is a person who was born biologically male, this person would not be allowed to go into a women's prison because of the new executive orders of the President of the United States, a president who was duly elected by a popular vote. So the judge is also lamenting that this individual, I don't even want to repeat all the postings that this individual had made over the last few years, but then that women would be exposed to him, and I'm saying literally exposed, in a women's jail, and the judge feeling badly about that. And not only that, but the person identifies as a furry. For those of you who may not be acquainted with that term, this is people who identify as an animal, usually a dog. It doesn't necessarily have to be. And they want to be treated like, and they want to act like a dog. A lot of this, of course, is sexually driven. I know we have a hard time trying to understand this, but it's a fact. So some people have been asking a question. At first I laughed at the question, but then I thought, well, there's some legitimacy to this. If you can say as a man that I'm identifying as a woman and demand the right to be treated as a woman, well, what happens when you identify as a furry? You identify as a dog. Why would you not be also allowed to have the right to be treated as a dog in certain ways that maybe humans can't? Uh, Folks, it's endless where this conversation can go, but also endless where the results and the consequences of this line of thinking can go. We'll watch, we'll see what happens, but a very disturbing case in terms of how it's being ruled on. And I know that cases in other countries don't have direct influence or a direct precedent on neighboring countries, but they are taken into consideration. It does have the effect of causing contemplation among justices and judges in terms of how they may rule on cases like that. So pretty disturbing stuff going on there with that ruling. Hamas has agreed. This is stunning. Now, as we say this, when Hamas is saying they're agreeing to something, you have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt. They are probably, Hamas as a group, one of the most savvy PR groups in the world, one of the most accomplished in terms of lying and in terms of getting organizations like the United Nations Relief Work Agency, UNRWA, to lie along with them. So we're going to take it as a grain of salt, but they said they're going to release all the hostages. They said they're going to agree to the ceasefire. And you know what's amazing? Look, regardless of how a person thinks about President Donald Trump, whatever your view is, are people not able, if somebody does something that's a worthy accomplishment, can we not acknowledge that and get past the the syndrome, some are calling deranged, as not being able to recognize a good thing a person might have done just because you don't agree with their politics? So here we have a situation where this is a Trump put this deal together, headed it up. Other people were involved for sure. But here we have Arab nations, Muslim Arab nations, agreeing with Trump that they should be recognizing Israel and agreeing with Israel on the guidelines of this policy. And here you had the Arab nations telling Hamas to smarten up and agree with the conditions and release the hostages, or else Hamas is going to get wiped out. Arab nations rallying behind President Trump and behind Israel. And at the same time, you can't have the media generally, certainly in Canada and many in the U.S., can't say this is a major accomplishment. It's stunning. And what does the Canadian government do? Well, just as they did just not that many days ago, recognizing a Palestinian state where none exists, which at that time they said it, Hamas was ready to surrender. We understand this when France and some other European nations and Canada came out with this statement rewarding Hamas for their horrific behavior. And now we've got the Arab nations supporting Trump and supporting Israel, and Canada staying silent and can't congratulate all the parties who worked so hard on this deal. Anyway, regardless of the politics, let's hope it holds together, folks, because there's a real opportunity for peace here. Let's see if that can, in fact, continue and if that can go on. There's been some interesting discussions or development in Canada on the areas of energy and energy projects and energy development in Canada. And what we've seen there is a policy where we have, or a situation where we have in Canada, the federal government saying, yes, they want to see major projects go ahead. Yes, there's going to be all kinds of exciting stuff going on and even pipelines. And now we have what has been quite a breakthrough in Canada, where it appears there's approval for a pipeline to go to and partway across the province of Quebec, which has been against any pipelines going across their territory because Quebec, of course, runs on hydroelectric power, and they don't need the natural gas, so they want to deprive the rest of the world of having it. And now, quite a breakthrough, they're saying okay to an LNG plant on the water in Quebec to be shipped up and out onto the Atlantic. And the federal Minister of Energy, Mr. Tim Hodgins, coming out and saying, you know what, this project might not be in the national interest. And folks, you have to be, regardless of political persuasion, you have to ask yourself, what on earth? Here is Canada with the country with the fourth largest reserves of energy in the world, has developed oil and gas products, including liquid natural gas, which is refined at better levels than probably anywhere in the world, which has liquid natural gas that can go through Quebec to Europe to break the stranglehold that Putin holds on the European nations, because they need that energy, they need that liquid natural gas. They have been funding Putin's attacks on Ukraine, and now we have a situation where Canadian LNG can get across the Atlantic and can literally break this vicious stranglehold that Putin has had on the energy and products for Europe. And the government says, the Canadian federal Liberal government under Mark Carney says, no, I don't know, this is probably not in the national interest. It's not only in the national interest, it's in the international interest. It also, by getting that fuel not just to Europe, but clean LNG to African countries, which are burning far less efficient products, in the process of doing this, you would also be lowering emissions globally. But the extreme climate folks will have nothing to do with it. They don't want to listen to reason or logic. They want to see all energy, all oil and gas, liquid natural gas stopped forever. And they don't want to see the world progressing. They're exposed now because the proper use of LNG will lower global emissions. And these extreme left climate folks still will have nothing of it. And because they also inhabit this point of view, inhabits our universities and our mainstream media, like CBC in Canada, to a degree like CTV, like CNN in the United States, like the BBC. These organizations are just clinging blindly, furiously to an energy policy that is not even scientific anymore. Coming against countries that like Canada, that have liquid natural gas, which would lower global emissions, and they will have none of it. And so the politicians, at least the federal Liberal politicians, are terrified of the media, and they are saying, I don't think this project's in the national interest. Well, let's hope there's a change of mind on that as they look to the benefits this could bring to Europe and, in fact, to the world. So Alberta, which struggles, of course, under this ridiculous national energy policy, which is always geared to harm Western Canada and harm Alberta, they've got some great things happening, just announcing what looks like a deal. Premier Danielle Smith announced a deal with Meta and a huge company called Kinetico, along with Pembina, which has been a pipeline company, now shifting resources and focus to building and being a hub for these amazing new plants that will allow for the expansion and development of AI. AI, of course, used properly, is going to lead to all kinds of improvements globally and in our lives. And Alberta, with its noticeably cooler climate in the winter and cooler at other times of the year, an ideal place for these massive plants to be installed on industrial heartland that's not taking up any agricultural space, and being able to move ahead. And even in spite of that, while this is happening and while this is being pursued, which would be hugely beneficial, not just to Alberta, but of course Canada benefits from taxing Alberta, and the world would benefit from it, We still have professors in our universities and teachers in our high schools, and I still hear this, who tell our young people that every time they do a search with AI, that's like dumping another bottle of water on the ground. We still have too many, in fact, a majority of our academics, terrifying young people that the world is coming to an end when it's not, when some of these technologies like refined liquid natural gas are actually going to lower global emission. But your kids and my kids and your grandkids and my kids, grandkids are being fed, frankly, a lie about this. And the inability for universities and mainstream media to take a step back, look at the situation, look at truly scientific studies, and at least allow the debate on this, we could see a lot more optimism among our young people and the opportunities that are going to arise for so many people in this highly technological era. We can't seem to have a broadcast or a podcast these days without a quick update on our fair-feathered friends at the ostrich farm. It brings a smile to our face in some ways, but it's a very serious situation, and I won't go into all the details. We talk about it almost daily, but we have the situation, this farm that's been generational for a long time, this family taking care of raising these ostriches, largely a lot of them for research purposes. A number of the ostriches died several months ago. There is no sickness. Birds have been tested. There's no sickness in the rest of the flock. And yet the Canadian, the CFIA, wants to come in and slaughter all the birds. As you've been seeing in the news, they've brought in RCMP showing up. And as I can say it again, as former minister responsible for the RCMP, I can tell you, knowing these wonderful men and women who serve in the RCMP, I can tell you they do not feel good about this. And as Minister of Public Safety and the great interchanges I had with them as I met with them across the country, they feel terrible about this, being told to put on hazmat suits, climb the poles out of the farm, and disengage the security cameras that the farmers have put up. It's bizarre. It's gone worldwide. It's gone international. We have laboratories now that are saying, listen, we will, at no cost, we'll take the samples from the ostriches and we'll see for sure they seem to be healthy, and tests to date show that the rest of them are healthy. We're willing to do that. And the federal Liberals have said, no, we just want to kill those birds. We're not going to let you test them. And we've had an offer from the United States. Now, I know the political sensitivities about that, but they're willing to take all the birds at no cost and contain them in the U.S., where they would love to work with those birds for research purposes. And again, the government, the federal Liberals, Prime Minister Carney has said, no, we just want to slaughter the birds. We just want to kill them. Well, there's quite a group of people that has gathered up there at the ostrich farms. They are now keeping drones in the air, and it's becoming an international spectacle. So people have been saying, okay, what is really behind it? Why the obstinance from the federal government? I'm going to talk for a minute about the thing nobody wants to talk about. And here is what I guess some conspiracy theorists are saying. And if the government wants to stop these conspiracies, then they should allow the birds to be tested, because the so-called theory is that if indeed the remainder of this flock, over 350 birds, who are healthy after a number died with a derivation of avian flu, does it in fact prove that herd immunity can be achieved? Now, huge portions of the scientific community believe that after a virus has come into a community of some kind and some members die and the rest survive, that there has been a development by the rest of the community of immunity, and they don't need either to be killed or to be vaccinated. And many people are saying that's what's behind this issue, that the federal government wants to kill the birds off because they don't want anybody saying that this could be living proof that herd immunity could happen. Because if they're accepting that, which actually is a biologically proven factor by many cases, That would mean that if something affects a human community somewhere, some people tragically die, and the rest survive and are healthy, it may mean that they don't need to be mass vaccinated if they have developed immunity. And this is the accusation that that the federal government is being hit with, that they don't want to face that possibility. I think it's just time to find out the truth. And if there's things we can discover that would help birds or humans at times like this, we should be doing it. But the federal Liberals seem to be terrified and are bringing out these ridiculous threats that's making us really the laughingstock of the world. So keep thinking about our beautiful feathered friends there, our ostriches, and let's hope good will come of all this. Quickly, a couple of reflections on the culture world. Just a remarkable breakthrough has happened, and you're not seeing a lot of it in mainstream media because they're shocked and horrified. In the U.S., of course, we're all familiar with the CBS network, and back in 2020, one of their leading journalists, a woman by the name of BARI WEISS, was continually complaining about the fact that CBS was not allowing different editorial points of view to be expressed. It's an ultra-liberal, ultra-woke organization. And Barry was saying, for goodness sake, what is wrong with allowing different views to be expressed? They would have none of it, as most mainstream media, the CBC, many times the CTV, CNN and BBC, they refuse to allow a significant or anywhere near an equal expression of small c conservative views. They only want the liberal views. And so Bari Weiss was eventually punted out of there for raising this issue. Well, she went and started her own organization called the Free Press. I've been a subscriber there for a number of years. Great publishing that they do on a variety of issues. And shock of shocks, guess what? They allow liberal points of views to be discussed and conservative points of views to be discussed. What a novel idea. That Free Press publication, it's called the Free Press, has done so well and taking so many people away from the CBS news network that CBS has now rehired Bari Weiss. They've put her in the position of an executive producer to make decisions on what type of presentations should be made and to really work at, I love these liberal organizations. They talk about diversity. It's only diversity when it's their point of view. It's another point of view, they don't want it. But a wonderful development here. And it could mean CBS's ratings will start to go up, especially over places like CNN, which is tragically entrenched in their wokeisms and find it so hard to break out of. And then people like me were saying, well, what's going to happen to the Free Press? I like reading the Free Press. Well, as we understand it, CBS bought the Free Press for $150 million, so good for Bari Weiss. And bonus, it's still going to be in publication. So we can still enjoy it if we get tired of watching CBS. So is this a sign, folks, that major networks are starting to wake up, that it's actually okay to have a conservative point of view, or are they afraid of being challenged? It looks like the ones who are open to true diversity are going to be the ones that will be successful. On a little more negative view, though, on that, Netflix, we've seen their shares just plunge over the last few days, and it's been around this issue where it's come to people's attention more broadly that they've been allowing, and some have said pushing, a propaganda approach related to the trans agenda towards kids as young as 7 years old. And as that became known over the last few days, people just lost their minds, as they should, and have been dropping their memberships and moving away from Netflix, and they've been taking a real hit. So it'll be interesting to see if Netflix will alter that. And it always brings me back to the question of what is with this intensity on certain groups of people that they've got to drive the transsexual stuff to kids like 7 years old. Listen, we live in a society where people can make their own decisions as adults. They can change their gender or the appearance of the gender. A man cannot become a woman cannot become a man. If I was still working with CBC, I'd be fired for saying that, but that's a fact. Why is this persistence? And you see it among public school boards. What is the persistent push towards kids? Why can't they leave kids to grow up to on their own with their parents' advice? When they become adults, let them make the choices that they want to make. So we're going to see what's going to happen with Netflix there. And on a final note of culture, this is really a sad element you may or may not have seen because it wasn't widely published. In China, one of their top actors, singers, a super young star for a number of years there. I'm probably going to pronounce his name incorrectly. Yu is his name, Y-U, Yu Menglanu. Okay, I didn't say it right, but that's pretty close. The Chinese government has now come out with a report regarding his death. He recently, are you ready for this, fell from a window and died on impact, of course. And there began to be some accusations from family and others that he didn't just fall out of the window, but in fact, something nefarious had happened. It was reported and then taken down that there were scratch marks on the wall around the window, that the curtains were torn. The Chinese government has now put something out saying, no, he just fell out of that window. Now, I like to travel to China. Of course, I'm very open about, I have disagreements with China's, as far as being a communist country, and I have profound difficulties with that, and I express those publicly. I still love to travel to China. If you haven't been to see some of their cities, 30 million, 35 million cities, there's many of them that are beautiful infrastructure and the highest levels of technology, and many cities over 10 million and going as high as 35 million, where everybody's got clean drinking water and showers every day and travels on the roads, and the trains run on time. So I do like to travel, and if I'm openly critical of the government there, I either could be barred from travel or maybe arrested when I get there. Now, I'm not going to change my position because I worry about that. So I'll be careful here in my remarks about the situation with young Mr. Yu. And maybe my suggestion would be to China, if they have difficulty with their infrastructure, because they make such beautiful infrastructure of people falling out of windows, possibly they could work with their national partners they've been drawing so close to, and that's Russia and Mr. Putin, because it seems like in the construction of buildings in Russia that people have a tendency to fall out of windows also. It's amazing that it tends to happen in these type of regimes. But for these structural difficulties, could I also say to the government of China, in Canada, we have excellent factories and facilities where we make the best windows in the world because of our climate and otherwise. So we'll reach out a helping hand to China. And as they consult with Russia about their window problems, Canada might have some solutions for you. Have a great day, folks.